Hello, everyone out there in webinar land. This is Glenn Kendall with Concourse Hosting, and you have signed up for Planned Giving Prospect Report. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you are new to GoToWebinar, I just show the screen here to give you a little bit of an orientation around it. So there's a lot of different panels within the massive control panel that is GoToWebinar. What I suggest is that you take the section called questions and hit the little box with the arrow on it. That will pop that section out. I'm going to do that myself right now. And then you can go ahead and collapse the rest of the control panel. And that way you can see the screen and everything that I'll be doing here and follow along if you want in your own version of Tableau. Wombat trivia is back again. So wombats, as you may or may not know, are marsupials. However, unlike other marsupials, a wombat's pouch actually faces the other direction, or backwards, toward the mother's rear. This allows the wombat to dig and not get dirt in her pouch. So keep that in mind. Tools that we're going to be using today. I love wombats. There's no reason why I do that. I just throw out wombat trivia just to kind of lighten it up and make it fun. Tableau Desktop 10.4, latest and greatest. Tableau Server, also 10.4. And I'm also going to be using a constituents data source from Tableau Server. Now this is something that we build here at Concourse for customers of ours that have our Tableau service. It's based on Razor's Edge Query, and basically it has the same sort of fields that you would have available within Razor's Edge Query, with the idea being you can recreate queries within Tableau. So I have some questions for you here just to kind of get everyone's juices flowing and get you interacting. How do you get your data, whether it's reporting in Tableau or any source? Just go ahead and type into the questions section there, even though I'm asking you a question and you're answering the question. Go ahead and type it in there. Are you doing exports? Do you have some direct connection to SQL? Do you don't know where your data comes from? It just appears, somebody gets it for you. Maybe you already have Tableau Server? Is there some cloud connector that you're using? Just curious here. I mean, exports are always a good way to start out when you're just getting going because, it's straightforward. You have all your data there, or at least enough of your data that you can work with. Somebody said that they use APIs. That's interesting. I'll have to ask a question about that part later. And yeah, I think for most people, it's exports, a few do SQL, and of course, the magic fairy dust is always fun. So when you get your data, I mean, can you think of places that you would then be doing filters? So for example, if I'm going to export some constituents, where's a place that I might do a filter on getting that data? Kind of leading the audience here a little bit, but. So one place you can do it is just on the export itself, right? So are you going to get all of your data? Are you going to literally export your entire database of constituents? No, if you're not going to do that, then you are filtering. You're doing some kind of filter on your constituents right off the bat. So that's one place, is on the export. So okay, let's say you have your export. So whether or not you've filtered there or not, you have that. So once you have that, where's another place that you can do a filter? Not the kind of filter, the place that you can do the filter. Someone says in the data source window in Tableau. Yep, that's another place. So really, I think this is an important thing to think about is what data that you're ultimately presenting to the user. And we'll kind of go through this a little bit here. So there's really, the three places are on the export itself. So again, are you getting all of the data, all of your constituents, and you don't care? Or you're going to filter by certain criteria, age of the constituent, last time they gave a gift, something like that. So that's one filter. The second filter is you as a builder of the report may put a filter in and hide that from the user. So whoever builds the report, that's another level of the filter. And then the third level is user. So you can present the filter to the user and let them do the discovery and the digging. So say, and that's what we're going to do a little bit here today. Because this particular report of plan giving prospects, we want to have some level of letting the user decide what kinds of things that they find important that they want to look at. Typically for plan giving, you know, you're going to be looking at older constituents. So right off the bat, you can do perhaps a filter on age. But just know if you do that, like you made a decision ahead of time to do that, then that may not align with what the user wants to do. Sometimes you are the user, so it doesn't matter. But what are the performance implications? Quickly, can you think of what the performance implications are between these various things? Between doing it at the export, doing it as the builder within Tableau, or doing it having the user do it. Processing speed, somebody put. Somebody said it's fastest at the export. I mean, it could be fastest at the export. It really depends on, first of all, how many constituents you have and how you're doing your export. If you're doing your export in Razor's Edge, it may not be that fast because of the way Razor's Edge works. It kind of does things one row at a time. So it could be, if you have complex criteria to do the export in Razor's Edge, could take a lot of time to actually do that. The user, of course, doesn't have to deal with that because you've done the export ahead of time. One of the cool things that Tableau can do is you can have what's called an extract in Tableau. And that's what we do with our service, where we literally take all of your data, all the constituents, we don't filter. We make an extract, which is highly indexed, and it's all there in Tableau server. So then it's fast and available and quick. So in that case, if you have the ability to do an extract, that would actually be like the fastest option to do. Of course, getting the data in there is going to take a certain amount of time, but you know, you're on the right track if you're saying, you know, you're thinking about these kinds of things, because it's usually going to be a trade-off, whether you're filtering on the back end or doing it on the front end. Someone says, if the filter is hidden, it can prevent the curious end user from doing a deeper dive. That's true. So it really depends on like what you are trying to accomplish with your report, and maybe, you know, you don't want the user to create, you know, get into a situation where they're looking at things that may not be correct. For example, you know, if you're looking at gifts and gift types, you may want to filter certain gift types and not let the user have control over that, because if they turn on the wrong kind of gift types, they're maybe double counting things and stuff like that. Okay. Thank you for your answers. I appreciate that. I think it just helps everyone to understand a little bit what everyone else is doing, and just, you know, think a little bit more about these kinds of things. I'm going to go ahead and fire up Tableau here. It's not in Tableau desktop, and I'm not going to take the time to show you in Tableau server, but just back to this concept of the data sources and whether or not you give users certain control over it. There is a new feature in Tableau 10.4. I just want to point out that I can't remember the exact name for it, but it's like approved data sources. So when you publish a data source in Tableau server, sometimes you can have a lot of different people publishing things, and you may or may not know if that, you know, is an official data source that's been approved. It's like, where did this data come from? We're not sure. It might just be someone messing around. So there is ability in starting in Tableau 10.4 to like stamp a data source in Tableau as being, you know, authorized or approved. And just from a governance standpoint, that may be something that may be important to your organization to manage that kind of thing. So I'm logged in here. So when I connect, when you first open Tableau desktop, it's going to want to connect to something. So I'm connecting to Tableau server here. I'm signed into our Tableau server site, connecting to just a sample data source. And here's 3 different data sources that we have available. Again, this is Razor's Edge sample data, so it's going to be fairly boring, but it's to just give you an idea of what's going on. So if we're doing planned giving, and this report, this idea, by the way, comes to us from one of our users. Thank you, Margaret, who was trying to build this report and wanted to try to do it in Tableau. So what I'm going to start out here looking at for constituents is actually the constituency itself. So I'm just going to add the constituency description just by double-clicking on that. This is a dimension, so it's basically a bunch of different categories, and it just adds it to the rows there. And then the other thing we want to look at is the name of the person. So again, these are right out of Razor's Edge, so it may seem, you know, like it's too much information that's in here, and in a way it is. But this is the way Razor's Edge query is laid out. And I'll go ahead and double click on name. Now it added it to columns, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in rows here because I want it to be sort of a drill down, or not a drill down, but like a cascade of, you know, I have my main category, and then the subcategory, if you will, is like all the users within this constituency. Okay, so again, it's just the sample data, but right now I'm looking at literally all of the data just organized by constituency, and you know, here's all the users organized by constituency. So if we want to look at who's a good prospect for planned giving, one of the things that Margaret, who's the person who came up with this idea, wanted to be able to check was the gift count, because based on their history of previous people who had elected to do planned giving with the organization, they found that once the person had a certain engagement, they've given a certain number of gifts, that you know, was kind of a trigger that they were a good prospect. So just gift count. So to create a gift count, I'm going to create a calculated field here. Just call it gift count. And those of you that have attended webinars with me before, you already know where I'm going with this. And this is going to be a level of detail calculation. So this is kind of like a for each constituent in the database. We want to count up the number of gifts that they had. So there's a special kind of calculation called a level of detail calculation that we can do in Tableau in order to figure that out. So you start out with include. That just is the keyword that it uses. And then we're going to base it on, I think it's just the record ID, system record ID. Go back up here to my cheat sheet and see. Yep, it's the system record ID. And then we're going to sum. Actually, no, we're going to count the number of gifts Gift internal ID. Gift. Oh, it's down here further. That's why I'm not seeing it. Tableau has an autocomplete feature, so once you start typing it in, it'll figure out what you're trying to do. So the syntax here is you do, bracket include. The system record ID is the record ID for constituent within Razor's Edge, or the records ID. In this case, we have both constituents and the gifts. So there's a record ID sort of associated with each one of these entities, data entities, if you will. So this is the one that's on the gift side of things, the record ID that's associated with gifts in the system. And so we're going to do a distinct count of all the gift IDs associated with that. So there should only be, every ID is a gift. Okay. So that's the gift count, and then we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to call this one giving total to find out that the total amount that the person has given. So again, level of detail. This time we're going to sum the gift amount. So it's always going to be an aggregation of some kind. So it's for each record, for each constituent, you're going to sum something, or you're going to aggregate something. You can either find the maximum value, minimum value, average value, or sum. And that's how the level of detail works. It's always for each one, you're going to do some kind of aggregation at that level. Okay, so this one is giving total. Somebody said, why not fixed instead of include? You could use fixed. The difference is that fixed will ignore any filters that we put in here, whereas include won't. So you can experiment with that and go back and forth and figure out why you would use fixed instead of include. Yeah, so you can try both of those and see in your particular case, which would work differently, but or which would work better for you. So just to explain what we're talking about here, Pat just asked the question about the difference between in level of detail. You can do what's called fixed or include, and this is just a help page within Tableau. On level of detail, it explains, the difference between these different levels of detail, and you can do fixed, include, or exclude. And so this just explains what the difference is between those ones. Okay. So what I can do now is you can just double click on these and add them. On giving total, I'm going to go ahead and go here under properties in the number format and tell it I want to make this a currency. So it'll just show up as dollars. I'll get rid of the decimal places because we don't care about pennies, and put that in there. So when you add more than one measure to a view like this, what it's going to do, it's going to basically put them side by side, and you see it automatically added measure names up at the top and then measure values down here. And so one more piece of information that we want to look at is the age of the person. And so that is down here under its measure down here under constituent information. So again, dimensions are up here. These are things that are categories, if you will, and These are numbers that you would want to aggregate. Now, we don't want to aggregate age, but we do, it is going to be, you know, a continuous value, if you will, and we want to be able to look at an age range. So we'll add this as well. And again, just double clicking on it automatically adds it to the viz. However, you can see by default, it creates a sum for the age, which we don't want to do. We don't want to sum up the ages. So Robert Hernandez will be 118,944 years old. So instead, we'll just say that's not a sum, that's an attribute, which is just straight up what's the value that we want to look at there. So this is kind of the starting point. Here's the values, just like the raw values we want to look at. I think maybe one other thing we want to do that after I first made this, Margaret came back and made the suggestion, you know, you might want to filter out deceased. So if they are deceased, so we're not showing them. So deceased, no. So we'll go ahead and add that filter, and that's probably a filter you don't want to show, right? You don't want to have the user be able to change that and change it to yes or both. So now we can do some additional filtering here as well to get out some values that don't make sense. So you may or may not care about null if there's not a constituency associated with them. Again, it's sample data, so we're not going to really care about that. Somebody asked, why not convert age to a dimension? That's a really good question, and let's go over that. Let's go over why not convert age to a dimension. First, before we do that, let's do some other filtering here on these other values. So I'm going to bring the gift count up. And we're going to say for the gift count, let's do at least for the filter. So this is saying what is the minimum number of gifts they will have to have given before we count them as a prospect. So I'll make this 10, just as something to start with. But then this might be one that you want to show for your users to do. So again, even if you collapse the GoToWebinar control panel, you might want to just grab the top and drag it down in the corner here so you can see the filter. So by default, the filters, you know, you just kind of drag it around. It's got this little slider, or you can also just type in up here a value. Then the same for giving total. If I hold down the control button while I drag this up, it makes a copy of it and adds it to the filter. So we'll say, well, we probably want to see that they've given at least, I don't know, we'll just start with $1,000. The same thing here, we can say, show the filter. And then that way, the user can decide, say, no, you know, I'm really want to see 500 or 5,000, and things will update accordingly. Okay, so age. Age now is a measure. A measure by default is continuous. Continuous value has a range. Let's drag this up to the filter and see how it looks. So it's just going by the data that's in Tableau, but it's a continuous range similar to these other things that I've set up. So I can start with a value, say 65. Show that filter. And then because it's continuous, we can just drag it around. What if we turn that into a dimension instead? So let's get rid of this. Get out of there, get out of there, and turn this into a dimension. So here it's green, That means it's a measure. So to convert it to a dimension, we just right-click on it and say convert to dimension. And now it's up here as a dimension. So we can add it now like the other dimensions up here. And this is how it shows up. You notice now we see some null values. However, now if we want to filter on a dimension instead of a measure, instead of having like that continuous slider, we now have like discrete values. So here's all the values. So you would have to then check the boxes that you want and uncheck the boxes that you don't want, because each age is a discrete value. By default, a dimension is discrete. Does that make sense? So if we want to say, okay, we just want to see people of these age buckets, just think of these as buckets that people are in. We have to check each one by one, and then hit apply. And then we would show it as a filter. We can change this to a multi-value dropdown, and then allow the user to be able to check the boxes that they want. So I think it depends on how you want. Now, I mean, there's two considerations here. One is how you filter it, and the other is how it shows up in the viz. So if it's a dimension, we can go ahead and add it up here to the rows as like a separate, you know, column that is like a sub of these others, or that's affiliated with these others. And then, so this is like dimensions over here, then we have all the measures here. And so if we throw it in over there, then it's just in with the measures. I mean, as far as we're displaying here, it really doesn't matter. The other thing we could do is change the age and make this continuous. What? So now we have a continuous dimension. So it's rare, but you can have a continuous dimension, and you can have a discrete measure. So let's drag this over here now as a continuous. Even though it's a dimension, we drag it over there. It's not going to like that. We should probably put it down here at the measures, but it's not going to like that either. It wants to aggregate it. It wants to, you know, make a little graph on it once you do that. Let's try it the other way. Let's make this back to discrete. Convert to a measure. But now convert to discrete. So now we have a discrete measure. Are you confused yet? Let's see what this one does. So same thing here, we don't want a sum, we want the attribute. And so I think it's going to really kind of function the same way. But I mean, the main difference is what I first showed you, which is, do you want people to do a range of values when they're selecting the filter, or do you want to have these discrete buckets that you're checking some and not checking others? That's really the difference there for between the dimension and the measure for the age. I'm going to just hit back here a bunch of times because I'm going to go back to having it as a measure. Any other questions on that? Cool. So this is this is the essentials of the report itself. So you can do some formatting to make it look a little prettier. Just right-click on somewhere in the viz and select Format. You can change the worksheet, make the font bigger. And then if you click over here on this little bucket with the drop, this is the shading, you can do something called row banding. So let's pick a different color so the row banding really shows up. So you can pick the pane, which is this part here. You can also pick the header, which is just to the left of the pane. Let's pick the same color. You can also pick the kind of banding that you do, which is, do you want to band like every other one, which is what I usually think of when it comes to banding. Do you want to band, in groups of 2, in groups of 3, in groups of 4, in groups, whatever. You can change all of that. And then to do this level, sort of the header of the header, we can just go ahead and do a format on that particular value and then just pick a similar shading so that one will match if you want. And maybe just do a little formatting on the name. And you can also sort here as well. So like the names, for example, you could sort here and then pick the field you want to sort by. So you can say, I want to sort by the gift count. So remember, it's doing it like per constituency description. So it resets at every level within here. So just keep that in mind when it's doing the filtering, if you're going to filter by name at least. Or you can also do descending so that it'll put the highest amount first in terms of the gift count. But this way at least, if you edit some of these filters, and you really just give it the minimum possible value, or just no value even if you want to, but just let the end user decide. Don't have a criteria. And if you do that, then the end user has full control over things. They can do their own data discovery and mess around here and figure out, what they want to look at. And then you can even throw constituency description over here as well onto the filters. And if you show that filter, then you can let the end user pick the things they want. They only want to look at certain things, then they can do that as well. So are there any questions about what we're doing here and any of this? So it's a real straightforward, simple report you can do. I think, again, what I was talking about at the beginning as far as doing your export first, it just depends on how much data discovery you want to do ahead of time, or you want to just pull out as much data as possible and do that in Tableau. So what we're looking at here, again, is just the sample data, but the idea being if it's all in Tableau, then you can do the maximum amount of discovery and let the end user play around with different things. And of course, you can add other criteria here as well. So there's things that we've already built into this data source, but one is the biggest gift amount and the biggest gift date. So you can put these in as other criteria, and I'll just show you these calculations. So in this case, for the biggest gift date, we're looking at the record's ID. We're choosing we're looking at the biggest gift amount. Maybe we should have looked at that value first. And if the biggest gift amount equals the gift amount, so we're going through all the different gifts, then we're picking the gift date. So there's like a little mini if statement in here. And so it's taking basically the minimum amount, the first gift date, where the gift amount equals the biggest gift amount, pick the corresponding gift date associated with that. And I'll send out this formula so that you can have it to reference. And then the biggest gift amount is a little more straightforward. This one is just picking the maximum gift amount at the level of detail amongst all the records. So you could add these as just additional criteria to give to your end user. Biggest gift date. So here, it's showing up as a measure. And I don't know that we can convert this over just because of the way it's aggregating things. Let's see if we leave it as an attribute. This one's not going to work as a filter the way a date normally would work because of the way it's set up in here. What if we convert it to continuous? Let's try that. We might run into the same problem, but maybe not. Okay, so by converting it to continuous, then we have a range of dates or a relative date for that particular one. So if the biggest gift date was within a certain period of time, I'm not going to add that one, but just know that that's like another, dial control that you can add in there to play with. And yeah, I mean, other than that, you can always just change the descriptions on these to be a little more user-friendly. So instead of just saying age, you can click on format. Well, sorry, it's not format filters. It's edit filter. No, it's not edit filter. It's edit title. So you can say choose a minimum age, because we're not letting him pick the maximum age, although you could do that as well. So then they know what to do. Okay, choose a minimum age of 55. Boom. And same thing here. Choose a minimum giving total, choose a minimum gift count, stuff like that. I lost my constituency description. That's because I didn't hold control down when I moved it over. I'll hold control down here. So it makes a copy of it when it moves it. There we go. Okay. That's the main stuff that I had for you guys today. Did you all have any questions about this or anything related to this? Great. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to end the recording now. Thank you all for coming. I am going to stick around for a few more minutes and take any additional questions that might come up. But yeah, hopefully this is useful to you and you can create a plan giving prospect report for yourself and your users. Thank you so much for coming today.